You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents. Direct from the Vero Essin Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
It seems to me now, looking at the number of people that have looked over my YouTube message concerning the 364-day calendar, that this is a matter of great interest, evidently, to a lot of religious people. And I have been asked many times, is there a quick and easy way to understand how to figure the 364-day Enochian, Zadokite, Davidic calendar? And yes, it's very simple because the calendar's perfect. And at the end of this particular message, I'm going to tell you how simple it is. But first, I want to read you a very short article about that calendar, starting with a quote from Ratson and Ben-Dov regarding scroll 4Q324D, which they recently published. And this quote comes from the University of Haifa Press. And I quote, "The lunar calendar, which Judaism follows to this day, requires a large number of human decisions. People must look at the stars and the moon and report on their observations, and someone must be empowered to decide on the new month and the application of leap years." Who decides? This is not part of the quote. Who decides? There's got to be an authority that decides, because obviously the Father in the sky does not make the decisions on that lunar calendar. You've got to look to the head rabbi or Orthodox Judaism or Karaite Judaism or some other group or person, and then just hope they're right. Let me continue on the quote here. By contrast, the 364-day calendar was perfect, because this number can be divided into 4 and 7. Special occasions always fall on the same day. This avoids the need to decide, for example, what happens when a particular occasion falls on the Shabbat, as often happens in the lunar calendar. The Qumran calendar is unchanging, and it appears to have embodied the beliefs of the members of this community regarding perfection and holiness. Unquote. Again, that comes from the scholars who translated 4Q324D, recently published, one of the last of the fragments that were published. Again, the 364-day calendar was perfect, and I might add that it is as perfect as a calendar can get, because I believe, and many others do, that since it comes from the scrolls, the Zadokites and their allies, and since the Zadokites were the priests who were to decide issues about the temple and worship forever, according to Ezekiel 40 through 44, that this calendar is the original temple tabernacle calendar. And it ought to be followed by everybody who believes, because certainly Yeshua followed this calendar. Did you know in the first century there were 4 calendars at least going, and that the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Nazarenes all had different calendars that they went by, different feast calendars, and Yeshua did not go, certainly, by a Sadducean or a Pharisaical lunar calendar, and each one of those was different. Too many flaws in it. In 1991, the BAS, Biblical Archaeology Society, had a critical role in freeing the Dead Sea Scrolls from a publication logjam in which an exclusive group of scholars produced 1 volume on the scrolls after 20 years of study. Throughout the subsequent 20 years, a larger team of scholars published 33 additional volumes in the official Discoveries in the Judean Desert series. In explaining what we've learned from the scrolls, expert Lawrence H. Schiffman wrote in Biblical Archaeology magazine, We now understand much better the evolution of the authoritative Masoretic texts of the Hebrew Bible and its relation to the other textual traditions, including the Greek Septuagint, that existed in Second Temple times. In Qumran, differing biblical text types or textual families coexisted, apparently without conflict. An official authoritative text had not yet been finalized. We have also come to understand the varying modes of biblical exegesis that would later influence the authoritative texts of both Judaism and Christianity. Now, that was written a long time ago. Things have changed since then. New scrolls have been found, scrolls have been translated, ancient documents have popped up out of the ground. One issue that was contested among different ancient Jewish sects was which calendar to use. While members of the Jerusalem Temple and the Hasmonean dynasty used the lunar calendar, the same as the Greek marketeers used, the Qumran community used a 364-day calendar, as exemplified again by scroll 4Q324D, recently published. This scroll describes two festivals that aren't in the Hebrew Bible, but are known from the Dead Sea Scroll known as the Temple Scroll, which I call the real Deuteronomy. Those are the festivals of new wine and new oil, which follow the festival of Shavuot, celebrating the new wheat. In addition, we learn from this scroll the name of the special day the Qumran community inserted between seasons to celebrate the transition. That name is Tekufah, Tekufah, which in modern Hebrew today means a period. The Qumran scribes used various codes in writing the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let me make a distinction here. The Qumran scribes did not write the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is an error. They may have written a certain percentage of the scrolls, but these scrolls came way before the Qumranites. And some of these scrolls were coded. The main code they used, which was employed in scroll 4Q324D, was Cryptic A, which was so named by its decipherer, scholar J.T. Millick of blessed memory. Quote, Cryptic A is a simple replacement code with each letter represented by a designated sign. So explain Ratson and Ben-Dov in their Journal of Biblical Literature article, and I quote, some of these signs correspond to Paleo-Hebrew or Greek letters, while others seem arbitrary. The signs played a part in the sectarian scribal practice, as some of them appear as scribal marks in various scrolls. The limited circulation of the cryptic script in the Yahad is useful for the study of secrecy and esotericism in that community. And they conclude their article with these words. It is also valuable for enriching our knowledge about other cases of cryptology in writings from antiquity, a well-known and intriguing aspect of ongoing research. Now, that is the end of this little article, and it simply modifies the quote that I started out with in these words. The lunar calendar, which Judaism follows to this day, requires a large number of human decisions. By contrast, the 364-day calendar was perfect. Again, quotes from Ratson and Ben-Dov. Now, how does it work? And why is there never any of what I would call intercalation in the calendar? Here's how it works. You start with the spring equinox, whatever day that happens to be. Then you must go to the next Sunday or first day of the week. That day has always been considered the first day. Then you look at your Bible and you read what day the sun was created on, which is the fourth day. Now, knowing what we call Sunday is always the first day, we go 4 days after that, which is always what we call a Wednesday. That is the beginning of your Zadokite calendar. It always begins on Wednesday. To figure the feasts, we go to Leviticus 23. But first we've got to know that the Zadokite calendar exists in 4 quarters. Each quarter is 91 days, according to Enoch, who Jude says was a prophet, and each of those quarters was made up of 3 months, 30 days, and 31 days, with that 31st day as the tradition, as a liminal day, a bridge to the next quarter. Then we apply Leviticus 23 once we have the months. The Passover is always going to be 14 days in, which is a Tuesday. Then you have your feast, which is Wednesday, Matzah feast. And so it goes with the rest of the months. You're going to find that the major feasts, with the exception of Shavuot, are going to be on Wednesday, and the same Wednesday of each year. All right, so you've gone through the 7 months of feasts, you've got those plotted out, and then you have to find the end of the year. No, you don't. That's the end of the feasts after 7 months. There is no end of the year. What you do is you wait for the next vernal equinox and start again. People get confused. They think, well, we can't get the 364 day and the 365 day to correspond. We need to have intercalary days or weeks. But the answer to that is no, you don't, because you are always starting on the equinox. So you're always going to be coordinating with the 365.1412 days of a solar year. So you might say, don't we have to put a day or two in after that 364 days to make it work out? No, you don't, because you're not looking for the end of a year. You don't care when the end of the year happens. This is a feast calendar, a temple calendar. It's in order to get the feasts on the right days as the Zadokites presented them way back when. So once your 7 months is over, your feasts are over, you just wait for the equinox again. No, there's no 13th month. No, there's no intercalary days or weeks. Starting your count with the equinox, and then the Wednesday after the equinox as the start of your festival year, you're always going to be keeping up with 365 plus days. It took me a while to get that in my head, not to worry about what the end of the 364-day year was, because it makes no difference. I would suppose that the people that kept the Zadokite calendar in the days of other calendars, like the Sadducean calendar came right straight from the Greek market calendar, the Pharisaical calendar came right straight from the Persian market calendar, the calendar that Jews use today came right straight from some authority. Those have to be modified by human beings in some way.
Do you suppose that those groups using market calendars have anything to do with money?
Of course they do. Money makes the world go around. But the Zadokite calendar, as Ratson and Ben-Dov said, is perfect and shows the Zadokites illustrating perfection and holiness of Elohim. Now, I'm not a Johnny-come-lately on this calendar. I've been on it for a long time, and I haven't been listening to other people trying to tell me how any calendar works. I came to the conclusion of this calendar when I was working with Moshe Konachowski on trying to find the right calendar years ago. He decided to take one road to finding it, and that was through texts. And I told him, I'm going to take another road, and that is, what calendar would Yeshua be on? Since Yeshua is to be King David and come back and rule the world in some means, what other calendar would there be except Yahweh's Zadokite calendar, solar calendar? Well, that made sense for me to go from that deduction, what would Yeshua have done, and start my study on that basis. And the first thing I learned from the Dictionary of Judaism was that there were at least 3 calendars being observed in Yeshua's day. The Sadducees had a calendar, the Greek calendar. The Pharisees had a calendar, the Persian calendar. Both of those were lunar calendars. But the third calendar was purported to be the Old Temple calendar, used by people that are called Essenes, but better Zadokites, and that had existed long before either of these other methods came to be, sometime around 171 BC. During the time of the Maccabees, there was a revolt of temple authorities. The high priest, the Zadokite priest, was murdered, Onias III, and the Zadokite priests were scattered after plenty of them had been murdered. Some of the Zadokites and their allies went east to Egypt, and there, with the consent and financing of the king of Egypt, Ptolemy, they built a new temple to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in what was known in the Bible as the City of the Sun, Heliopolis. And that temple thrived because it had the right priesthood. There was one big difference between the Onian temple and the Jerusalem temple. While the Jerusalem temple had a gold menorah, the Zadokite Onian temple also had a golden circle to represent Elohim. Others of the Zadokites, when they fled Jerusalem, went west for the record, and they went into the desert of Syria, Trachonitis, Adiabene. Stop that. The devil's putting static on my line right now. Now it seems to be gone. To wilderness camps, including the teacher of righteousness. And they became known as the Chosei, those that were doing things, which word came to Greek ears as Essenes, or Essenoi, which they've been called ever since. Although they didn't call themselves Essenes, they were known as the Way, or the Way in the Wilderness. They'd gone out into the wilderness to make the pathway straight. And you might go as far as to say, to make the pathway straight for Messiah, Yeshua, because we see John the Baptist and Yeshua as very Essene-like characters who said they came to call the people to repentance and to make the way straight. So that's my explanation of the 364-day calendar. Essentially, equinox, the next Wednesday after the equinox is day 1. Simple. Months, 30, 30, 31. The next quarter, 30, 30, 31. The next quarter, 30, 30, 31. You don't have to care about the rest because there are no feasts there. Let us go on to James Vanderkam, who's probably the highest placed expert in calendars, and he's written an article with the same title as his book, Calendars in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he writes, liturgy was a crucial part of Qumran life, but to sanctify life, it is necessary to sanctify the year. For this reason, it was important that the calendar should not only be in accordance with the progress of the stars and the seasons, but also be based on a revealed tradition. Today, we know that this was one of the controversial issues between the Qumran group and the rest of the Israelites. And you can probably guess why now, because those at Qumran and those in the wilderness and those called Essenes and those called Nazarenes had a big problem because the temple had a usurping priesthood, full of sin, having changed the calendar, having lined up with foreign powers, especially Greek powers, and taking their part in killing the prophets. When it speaks about killing the prophets, it's talking about the prophets of the 2nd century BC and the 1st century BC. That's another subject. Some of the first Dead Sea Scrolls to be found in 1947 suggested to scholars that issues having to do with the religious calendar were important to the writers of the texts. For example, the community rule, a work that describes the basic beliefs and practices of the group, stipulates, "They shall not depart from any command of Elohim concerning their times. They shall be neither early nor late for any of their appointed times." That's in column 1, lines 14 through 15. The Habakkuk Pesher, or commentary on Habakkuk, provided another type of evidence that the group differed from their contemporaries in calculating the timing of at least one important holiday, the Day of Atonement, in a comment on Habakkuk 2:15, which he read as saying, "Woe to him who causes his neighbor to drink, who pours out his venom to make them drunk, that he may gaze on their feasts." The expositor writes, interpreted, this concerns the wicked priest who pursued the teacher of righteousness to the house of his exile, that he might confuse him with his venomous fury. And at the time appointed for rest, the Day of Atonement, he appeared before them to confuse them and to cause them to stumble on the day of fasting, their Sabbath of repose. That's the Pesher, column 2, lines 4 through 8. The wicked priest seems to have been the reigning high priest, and according to biblical law, he had many duties in the sanctuary on the Day of Atonement. In addition, this was also a day on which all work, as well as travel, was prohibited. So, if he was the high priest, he would not have been able to travel to the place where the teacher of righteousness, the leader of the group behind the scrolls, had gone for refuge. All this led scholars to the conclusion that the wicked priest and the teacher of righteousness observed the Day of Atonement, dated by the Bible to the 10th day of the 7th month, at different times, and that they therefore employed different calendars. The Qumran commentary may be suggesting as much when it refers to the day as their Sabbath of repose. With the discovery of more texts in the early 50s, especially the ones from K4, the information about the calendrical matters increased exponentially. It had been known from the texts available before the scrolls discoveries that Jews in antiquity had used more than one calendar. As I said, I found that in the Dictionary of Judaism. There was, of course, the one familiar from rabbinic texts. According to it, each month had 29 or 30 days. That is, they were true lunar months, and the beginning of the month was determined on the basis of the testimony of reliable witnesses who reported having sighted the new moon. The lunar months were augmented by intercalation, the purpose of which was to bring the lunar system more into harmony with the solar year. This was important because several festivals that are precisely dated in the Bible are tied to specific harvest seasons. So, for example, the Festival of Booths, celebrated in the 7th month from the 15th to the 21st day, marked the end of the harvest season in the early autumn. If one used only lunar months, every 12 months the calendar would fall behind the solar year, which determines the seasons by 10 or 11 days, with the result that in just a few years the festivals and their corresponding harvest seasons would be far separated from one another. In order to retain the scriptural connections between harvests and holidays, the lunar calendar was supplemented by an extra month, approximately every third year, or 7 times in 19 years. In this way, the shortfall would be remedied regularly and the proper seasonal associations secured. In 2 other texts known before the scrolls were found, First Enoch and Jubilees, another calendar appeared, a solar one with 364 days per year. Each quarter of the year contained, as I said, 91 days and consists of months having 30, 30, and 31 days. In 1 Enoch 72 to 82, which is called the Astronomical Book of Enoch, the 364 calendar, the 364-day calendar is described in some detail and is placed side by side with a lunar calendar in which months have alternately 29 and 30 days for a total of 354 days in a 12-month period. For neither of these calendars does the astronomical book provide a method of intercalation to bring it into line with a true solar year. The author simply notes the difference between the two and gives no indication that he was aware a solar year actually lasts about 365.25 days. In the text, both calendars are revealed to Enoch, the seventh person from Adam, by a holy angel named Uriel. Neither the solar nor the lunar system is presented as superior to the other. The astronomical book was written no later than about 200 BC, which is the approximate date of the earliest Aramaic copy of the book from Qumran Cave 4. And remember, 200 BC is about the same time as the so-called Sadducees usurped the temple priesthood from the Zadokites. If you look again at Ezekiel 40 through 44, you'll find that the only people supposed to be ministering in that temple by the word of Yahweh were the Zadokites. These impostors that came in, because of their coming in, changing the calendar, and being of the wrong family entirely, the temple was cursed, was bound to be destroyed, and it was. Even the Maccabees put themselves into the place of the high priests. Matters are quite different in the Book of Jubilees. It was written in Hebrew around 160 BC, at the same time, and packages itself as a revelation to Moses from an angel of the presence, who reads the contents of the book to Moses from heavenly tablets. Moses is supposed to have received all the information in the book while he was on Mount Sinai directly after the covenant had been renewed. The details of the calendar were disclosed to Moses in connection with the story about the flood. The deluge account is the only place in Genesis Exodus that has a heavy concentration of exact dates. For example, 600th year, the second month, and 17th day, Genesis 7:11. And it ended for the occupants of the ark the next year on 2/27, Genesis 8:14. In other versions of Genesis, such as the one read by the author of Jubilees, back 200 BC or earlier, they don't know when these were written, the earth became dry on the 2/17. That is exactly 1 year after the flood began, according to Jubilees 5:31. The fact that the flood lasted 1 year suggested that its story contained essential information for establishing the proper annual calendar. For this reason, the writer of Jubilees attached a section about the calendar to the flood narrative. He notes that each of the 4 seasons has 13 weeks, that is 91 days as in 1st Enoch, that's in Jubilees 6:29, and he adds, quote, all the days of the commandments will be 52 weeks of days. They will make the entire year complete. So it has been engraved and ordained on the heavenly tablets. One is not allowed to transgress a single year, year by year. Now you, speaking of Moses, command the Israelites to keep the years in this number, 364 days. Then the year will be complete, and it will not disturb its time from its days, nor from its... Then the year will be complete, and it will not disturb its time from its days or from its festivals, because everything will happen in harmony with their testimony. They will neither omit a day nor disturb a festival. Jubilees 6:30. In some respects, the author of Jubilees, while sharing the 364-day solar calendar with the writer of 1st Enoch, takes different positions from those of his predecessor. For example, he dates the biblical festivals according to this calendar. And remember, 1st Enoch doesn't mention Sabbaths or festivals, so I don't call what is in 1st Enoch as being a calendar, but rather observations. So in a way, people that talk about the Enochian calendar, well, there really is none. They should say Enochian observations. And then he forbids the use of a lunar calendar. The angel who reveals the book warns that there would be people who, quote, forget the covenantal festivals and walk in the festivals of the nations after their error and after their ignorance. There will be people who carefully observe the moon with lunar observations because it is corrupt with respect to the seasons and is early from year to year by 10 days. Jubilees 6:35. Use of the lunar calendar would lead people to consider ordinary days as religious festivals and vice versa, thus mixing the sacred and profane. Calendrical deviation would entail that one, quote, err regarding the months, the Sabbaths, the festivals, and the Jubilee. 6, verse 38. Jubilees, like 1 Enoch, offers no hint that the author advocated any kind of intercalation. Aligning the year with the equinox, he's always going to avoid that. Another way in which Jubilees differs from the astronomical book is that the calendrical discussion in chapter 6 is tied to proper observation of the Festival of Weeks. This holiday, Pentecost, is a crucial one for Jubilees because on it the covenant was made and later renewed. In biblical law, nearly all the festivals are carefully and precisely dated, but one prominent exception is the Festival of Weeks. The scripture lists of holidays say only that it was to be celebrated 50 days, hence its Greek name Pentecost, after the waving of the barley, Omer, a ceremony that is also not dated other than that it was to be performed at some point after Passover. Quote, on the day after the Sabbath, Leviticus 23:11. There were discussions among Jewish experts about the precise meaning of that phrase. Some took it to mean that the Omer was to be waved the day after the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, understanding that Sabbath to mean holiday, as it does in some passages. They therefore celebrated the Festival of Weeks in the first part of the third month of the year. Jubilees dates the Festival of Weeks to third month, 15th day. From this it follows that the writer understood the day after the Sabbath in Leviticus 23:11 to mean the Sunday following the first Sabbath after the conclusion of the Festival of Unleavened Bread. That is, first month, 26th day. All of this information was available to scholars who, in the early days of Qumran research, were trying to understand and situate the Dead Sea Scrolls. As their study proceeded, it soon became evident that there were a number of connections between the teaching of 1 Enoch and Jubilees on the one hand, and the scrolls on the other. For example, both sets of texts interpreted the sons of Elohim in Genesis 6:1-4 to be angels who mated with women and fathered monstrous children who caused the great increase of evil that forced Elohim to send the flood. Also, one important Qumran text, the Damascus document, referred to Jubilees as an authority in chronological matters, that is in column 16, lines 2-4, and numerous copies of both 1 Enoch and Jubilees were identified in the Qumran caves. Clearly, there was some connection. While the calendar documents from Qumran Cave 4 were made available, the nature of that connection becomes more transparent. First, some texts from Qumran say or imply that a year lasts 364 days. The clearest evidence comes from the large Psalms scroll from Qumran Cave 11. In a passage that describes King David's poetic composition, it says, quote, Yahweh gave him an intelligent and brilliant spirit, and he wrote 3,600 psalms and 364 songs to sing before the altar for the daily perpetual sacrifice for all the days of the year, and 52 songs for the Sabbath offerings. That's column 27, lines 4-6. The explicit statement from the Psalm scroll, that is 364 songs, one for each day of the year, was reinforced by a number of calendrical texts from Cave 4, which, in varied ways, also indicated that the 360-day year lay behind their calculations. They also showed that, As in Jubilees, the Festival of Weeks was dated to 3rd month, 15th day. In light of these facts, it came as something of a surprise that the Qumran library also included a number of documents that are calendrical in nature and that present both a solar and a lunar calendar. In this respect, they follow the astronomical book, not the Book of Jubilees. Now, regarding the Qumran calendar, the texts from Qumran that are labeled calendars are not calendars in the modern sense of the term. They do not list each day of the year. They are rather lists that date recurring phenomena such as Sabbaths or festivals. That's why I call these calendars our feast calendars and not necessarily the secular calendars that people went by for the rest of the year. More often, they are lists that coordinate two or more phenomena within a calendrical framework. It will be helpful to examine a few examples of the different types of texts. Okay, number 1, lists dating recurring phenomena. 4Q327 is a small text with very short lines, just a word or two in each, and is thus list-like even in appearance. In repetitive language, it specifies the dates in each month on which a Sabbath falls. It apparently did the same for festivals, although only 2 are mentioned in the fragment. The details in the text fit the 364-day calendar, and the preserved portions probably deal with the 5th and 6th months of the year. Another list-like text, 4Q317, provides exact information in fractions, using 14ths, for how much of the moon's surface is covered or illuminated during the successive nights in a lunar month. Number 2. Texts correlating two or more entities within a calendrical framework. Several Qumran calendar texts not only give the dates but also relate them to the names of priestly divisions. The large number of priests in ancient Israel required that a system be introduced so that only some of them would be on duty in the temple at any one time. 1 Chronicles 24, 7 through 18, part of David's instructions to his son Solomon for the temple and temple service, contains a list of the 24 groups into which the priestly families are divided. The Bible does not explain how the system worked, but later sources say that a priestly division or watch would serve in the temple for 1 week and then would be relieved by the next one on the list. The result was that in a year, each priestly watch would be on duty for 2 weeks. That's 24 times 2 equals 48. And while a few would have to serve 3 times to fill the remaining weeks in the year, since each priestly group served for 1 week at a time, from Shabbat to Shabbat, the calendarically inclined apparently saw in this system a way to name the weeks of a year. They would be designated by the name of the priestly division then on duty. Several Qumran texts show precisely this practice at work. If one knows the lists of priestly watches and the number of days in each month of the 364-day calendar, one can derive rather interesting information from these seemingly tedious enumerations. Now, it's after midnight. This article is quite long, but it's loaded with information. I'm not going to read any more of it, but if you want this article and you want a PDF of a rightly divided 364-day Zadokite calendar with all kinds of annotations, then please write to me and ask for it. I will send it right over in your email. Write to me at www.yahad.me. If you're a calendar maven, you're going to want some of the information that I have here. And I'll put together a package on this calendar along with the calendar, and I'll send it right on to you. In the meantime, I hope you're excited about what has popped out of the earth to bring us back to what we might call the Millennium Calendar, the Davidic calendar, Yahshua, when he returns, is coming in the stead of King David, and what would he use? Sadducean calendar? The Jewish calendar of today that's so screwed up? Or the perfect calendar? And I thank you for listening. Please help me out if you would. Subscribe to youtube1.org, and I will do the same for you. Amen and amen. Thank you, Yahweh. You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.